Hello, audience. Welcome to Bartelle's Money Talk. I'm Johnny.
And I am Teresa, and today we have with us a real estate genius. He's a licensed realtor, and we are going to discuss a term that neither of us have heard of, and I'm sure you haven't heard of. So, Nick, can you introduce yourself and tell the audience exactly what you do?
Well, that might be the most flattering introduction I've ever had of being a real estate genius. I'm feeling real good just with that alone right here. So, but I'm so honored to be on. Like I was saying, I love your show. I love the people that you're helping. My name is 𝐬𝐻𝐾𝐿. I am a licensed realtor, but I'm also the founder of the DIY Homebuyer Academy. And so I'm sure we'll get into what that all looks like, but that's a newer venture for me where it's another angle on helping people with their real estate goals.
Okay, well then I already have a question. So, and we'll get into that like you said, but since you do have the academy, are you still selling homes or are you focusing on your academy?
Great question. Yeah. So I still help people, especially on the listing side with their homes. I think that there's a lot of value in having a listing agent, and we can talk about the reasons for that. But on the home buyer side, that's where I've really taken a step back from helping home buyers, at least in the traditional sense, and where I've been able to provide more value to home buyers by teaching them how to represent themselves.
All right. Well, let's dive in then, because I think the audience would like to know, what is a do-it-yourself home buyer? What is that?
Yeah, great question. So I imagine to some people the whole idea of like buying a home without a realtor. You mean, are you suggesting I make one of the biggest financial decisions of my life and that I just go at that by myself? And there's a part of me that's like, yeah, that's exactly what it is that I'm suggesting that you do. And the reasons for that are many. So to answer your question directly, a DIY home buyer is somebody that enters into a real estate transaction legally unrepresented. So they are taking on full responsibility for every decision that they make in the transaction. They're the one that's putting together the offer. They're attending their inspections. They're doing the research on the home, reaching out to listing agents and sellers directly. So they're taking on a lot more responsibility for themselves. But the advantages to that are many. There are significant financial advantages. There are advantages in terms of the education that you get by learning the process, how much better you get to know the home. And there's no questions about the incentive structure or whether or not you've got this third-party agent, if they're actually leading you in the right direction or not, which is a big question for a lot of folks because we can talk about these issues, but buyers, agents, there's some question marks as to their incentive structure and how well they're actually serving the clients that hire them.
Well, so now, Nick, I want to know what made you decide to be concerned about this because in my mind, we need a realtor. So that's why you're so intriguing to us because we never knew anything about this DIY home buying. So what gave you the desire to do this?
I love that question. Yeah, thanks. Because I got my start in real estate, actually working in new construction, representing a builder, which was kind of a unique introduction to the industry because in new construction, it's a lot more common for a home buyer to walk into a model home or sales office and they don't have an agent and they'll just go through the whole home buying process working directly with the builder's representative.
Right.
That's true.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So that was my kind of introduction. And that probably early on in my career is what got the wheels turning of that. Like, all right, about half the people that I've worked with didn't have an agent and they were able to successfully navigate the process with me just treating them as a customer and helping them along. And then as I went out on my own to build my own real estate business, I focused on listings, but I would also help friends and people that I knew with buying houses. But most of these people were incredibly competent folks that were entrepreneurs or high up managers in companies or moms that have had multiple kids at home and they have managed their household with excellence, And so it's like, all right, these are highly, highly competent people. And the more that I worked with them, the more that I was just realizing that they are paying me for a real convenience that I provide, but with a little bit of education, they would absolutely be able to handle this transaction on their own. And so for me, it was really this, as I was thinking about the value proposition, going to bed at night after some of these closings, and when I'd be getting checks for $18,000, $20,000, sometimes $25,000 from these buyers that I helped, I'm having to think like, did I really add $25,000 $1,000 of value to the transaction for my client. And if I'm completely honest, sometimes the answer to that question was like, I don't know that I did. And just the way that I'm wired, I want to provide more value to my clients and more value to the world than what I extract. That's what good business is, right? Is you create more value than what you actually receive. And so it got me thinking like, all right, there's got to be a better way to do this. And so I had some friends that were buying a $1.3 million home in the area. They were also having me help them list their current house. And so I said, hey guys, they're entrepreneurs. They're very, very successful people. I was like, let me help you in the traditional sense with listing your home. But I've got this idea of where I could just coach you through the actual home buying process, but you could be an unrepresented buyer and then you're not paying me $30,000 in commission. Would you be interested in that? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. You can imagine I leveled up a little bit as their friend going through
Yeah, you did.
Yes, yes. So we went through that whole process together where basically I was able to consult with them and teach them and go over inspection reports and negotiation strategies and support them in those ways. But I wasn't actually having to show up for all those things. I wasn't having to tour them through homes. It was a lot more time efficient for me and much more empowering for them. So that maybe is a long story, but that's kind of the background to how this whole idea of, all right, I could actually change my role as a buyer's agent and become more of a buyer's coach and consultant and teach people how to go through this process and save them. I mean, in the case of those friends, over $30,000 on their home purchase.
Wow. I mean, because that's huge to tell your friends, hey, I'll save you some money instead of you're gonna have to pay me. So
Yeah.
I'm sure you did
Yeah.
level up. So what kind of skills does someone need to actually represent their own self in the home buying process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the skills really I know that this is not a analogy that most people like get excited about, but the skills are pretty similar to when you go and buy a car. Like nobody likes dealing with a dealership and going in and buying a car, but the process is actually very similar, where when you're wanting to buy a car, you start online and you do your own research and you're looking up reviews and you're shopping the same car with different dealerships and different online places, trying to see, all right, who's got the best deal, who's got the best warranties. And then when you actually go into the dealerships to test drive it, check it all out, that's when you really get the feel for the vehicle as well as the feel for the dealership and who you're going to be working with. And then it gets to everybody's least favorite part, the negotiations and reviewing the financing and the contracts and all of that. So the skills that you need to buy a car are very similar to the skills that you need to buy a home. Now, of course, the home is generally 10 times more expensive, but it's not 10 times harder. It's drawn out a bit more, but it's not actually that much harder. And here in 2025, with all of the online tools and resources that are available to us, we actually can do incredible market research on our own to be able to figure out what good comparable properties are, what they've recently sold for, how much a home is worth. We're able to look at zoning, what's going on in the neighborhood, crime statistics, school ratings, and really able to negotiate. And especially when you think of how much a buyer's agent is making, generally about 3% of the purchase price of a home, it's like just simply by removing that piece of the equation, you could be saving 15, 18, again, just we're talking thousands of dollars, where it's like that alone creates some buffer for, it's like, all right, even if you're not the best negotiator, can't always negotiate for yourself the best possible deal, by removing that piece, you're already creating quite a bit of buffer and value for yourself.
So you're saying that I don't need to get my realtor's license to purchase a home?
Yes, good question. And that's we could go even a little further back in my story, because I started even before I got licensed. I was really into real estate investing. This is when I was living out in Minneapolis, and so I had a realtor friend who was helping me with buying property, and I was looking at the checks that he was getting at the end of those. I was like, dang, I've got to learn how to do this. But I thought I had to get licensed, and so that's what I did. And lo and behold, you don't have to take the hard route like I did of actually going through the course, you can, it's perfectly legal and legitimate to represent yourself, and you don't need a license. Now, it is a big decision and it is a lot of money. And so you should be educated. You should, like, while I believe most people have the competence to do it, just by being a competent person, that doesn't necessarily mean you know everything that you need to know. And that's really, as I was looking at the landscape of, well, what resources are out there for home buyers? That's where I just felt like, man, there's almost nothing. Like everything that you find
Right.
online is built towards like, we'll teach you a little bit, but the final point of every lesson is, but go hire yourself a buyer's agent. I was like, no, we need to have
Yes.
some education that goes beyond that, actually teaches people how they can do it themselves. So
Wow.
you don't got to get licensed, but you should get educated. And that's really a big piece of the market, or the gap that I'm trying to fill with what I'm doing, is create good educational resources for home buyers.
Okay, because I'm like, what if someone comes up to you and say, well, what about the language that's in the contract? Because you know, the paperwork is like that thick. And it's like, okay, well, the realtor that has license like you, they know what to look for in the contract. Would someone have to have an attorney to go through
Good
the
question.
contract?
Yeah, so that fantastic, because this is where the whole real estate industry, like, we got to understand that the National Association of Realtors, it's a powerful group, and it is designed to protect itself and to protect realtors. And so realtors, brokerages, the National Association of Realtors on the whole, they are deeply, deeply invested to make real estate sound as scary and as complicated as possible, so that home buyers feel like, I could never do this on my own. Of course, I'm dependent upon them. But those contracts are highly standardized. In fact, the realtors that are filling them out, like, they don't have any sort of law degrees. They've got 90 to 120 hours worth of real estate education, which in the grand scheme of things is not much. So when it comes to these standardized contracts, they are big and thick, like what you're saying, but they're not actually all that complicated. So that's where if I'm working directly with somebody, I'm able to go through and just explain what the crucial parts are. But of course, you can always hire a real estate attorney to look over these contracts with you. And a real estate attorney, generally, to do a contract review of something as standardized as a real estate contract, is only going to cost you $200, $300, $400, which is, a fraction of what a typical buyer's agent is actually going to make. So most people just don't really realize that there's other options out there to make sure that you're legally protected with going through those things. And they don't realize that, yeah, it's intimidating how big that stack of paper is, but it actually is all pretty straightforward.
Okay.
While you was talking, I'm thinking in my mind. So this is a question I have to ask you. How does other real estate agents feel about you sharing all this great information, about, you could be your own person to buy your own home. You don't need a realtor. How do they feel about it?
Yeah, Johnny, they're not a fan of me.
Did you have your tires cut yet?
Yeah, seriously. I mean, I've got there's definitely a target on my back. And I've had to be kind of careful about it, even like locally, just
Wow.
with how to maintain the professional relationships. But the way I think about it is that this is where things are headed. Like, there was that lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors. Like, that should have been a wake-up call to the industry. Now, it's been disappointing, in my opinion, how the industry has responded to the lawsuit and the rules. And I suspect that this year, the Department of Justice is going to reopen a lot of that case, looking at buyer agent compensation and the ways that the game is kind of rigged against consumers and for the benefit of realtors. So I think that there's, for people that are looking for it, like, there's writing on the wall that this industry is going to be disrupted and changed. And I would, again, rather be on the right side of that, doing innovation, doing what I truly believe is adding more value to people, helping people save money, empowering them as home buyers. And if that puts me out on the forefront, then yeah, I'll take some shots and some hits for that. But I believe that inevitably this is where things are going. And so I don't really mind taking a bit of heat.
Yeah, and then plus you being a blessing to others, and because you're giving back so much, it's going to continue to come to you, is what I believe. And so, based on what you're saying, in case we have someone listening, including myself, you don't have to go into details, but can you tell us what the lawsuit was concerning or is concerning?
Yeah, great question. So at the highest level, there was really two sides to it. It used to be that sellers were required to offer some form of buyer agent compensation in order to get their house on the multiple listing service. And sellers sued the National Association of Realtors saying, that's not fair. We shouldn't be obligated to pay an agent that is actively working against us, because the buyer's agent's supposed to be bringing a better offer for the, so sellers are saying that's not right. And then I think the bigger issue is on the buyer side, where when sellers were offering compensation, the buyers sued the National Association of Realtors saying, hey, why does the seller get to determine what my agent makes? Why don't I have a voice in how much my agent gets paid? It struck buyers at the knees from their ability to really have any teeth in negotiations with their realtor, because the realtor, and this was the line for ages and ages, oh, you should hire a buyer's agent because you don't have to pay for him. The seller pays the buyer's agent. You've heard that before, right? The buyer's agent is free to the buyer. And so that was really a misnomer. And I guess if you wanted to sum up the lawsuit in anything, it would be that sentiment that buyers and sellers were suing the National Association of Realtors, and the DOJ is very interested in this question because there's no such thing as a free lunch. And basically it worked out so that realtors were able to artificially fix commissions because they took away negotiation power from buyers. So as a result of that, now buyers and their agents have to have an agreement up front that outlines what compensation is. And that's really where I think buyers are now thinking about it for the first time ever, how much the buyer's agent is actually getting paid. And even if the seller is willing to credit that, the buyers are starting to realize, wow, for 3% on a $700,000 home, that's $21,000. Is there another option? Could I do this myself? That would be a significant savings if I was able to take that off the purchase price or closing cost credit or use that in other ways. So that was part of the cool timing of what really catalyzed, like, all right, we've got to create another alternative for people so it empowers them to do it themselves.
So since now that they're trying to empower people, or you are, to do it themselves, what are some of the challenges that they face when they actually go do it themselves? Because I know there got to be some challenges to this.
Yeah, man, y'all are awesome. It's such a good question. There are challenges. There's a real bias, especially among realtors, against self-representing home buyers. And you can understand that, right? Like the idea is that a self-representing buyer means that one other realtor is not getting paid as much as they could have been otherwise. So some of it's just like there's a resistance to self-representing buyers. And then part of it is just that listing agents are uncomfortable with the idea of working with somebody that's unrepresented because they feel like they're bringing on additional work or additional legal liabilities without necessarily any additional compensation for themselves. So that piece of it, I really understand. Now, that's something where realtors as professionals, they're just going to have to adjust to the new reality and kind of be put back in their place of remembering what they exist to do, and especially as listing agents, that they exist to serve their seller and sell the home to a qualified buyer, whether they're represented or not. But it's also a piece of my education where for home buyers, helping them really approach even the very initial conversation with a listing agent and seller in the right way, where you really have to show up professionally, organized. You need to show that you're a qualified and legitimate buyer. And that can be one of the true complaints against DIY home buyers, is that some DIYers, it's because they've had bad experiences with realtors in the past, or they can have a real arrogant edge to them. So that's something that I always warn people that are wanting to do it themselves against. Like, that arrogance isn't going to get you anywhere. So you kind of got to swallow your own pride or emotions towards realtors. You got to realize that listing agent, they're kind of the gatekeeper. And so you do need to treat them with professional courtesy and respect. But usually when you can do that, start the conversation off right, prove your qualifications, that you've done the financial work of getting your pre-approval letter, you've got your proof of funds, show that you've done at least some initial research on the property and the neighborhood, then listing agents are going to be far more inclined to work with you.
Okay, and that's good to know. And so the little bit I know about real estate and buying a home. Like I know there are brokers. So if we have someone listening and they're like, maybe I'll try this myself. Okay. Who would they work with? Would they work with that realtor or the broker? And then to piggyback off of that, what do you do when a realtor is like, no way, I'm not showing you this house?
Yeah.
They don't want to talk to you at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. So still most homes that people see, like as a home buyer, when you're looking online, those are going to be listed by listing agents. And so as a self-represented or a DIY home buyer, you're going to be reaching out directly to that listing agent. And it kind of changes state to state, whether they're called a realtor, listing agent, or a broker. But basically, whoever's name is on that sign or on that listing, that's the person that the seller has hired to represent them. And that's who you want to be reaching out to directly. And what you tell them in that initial conversation is, hey, saw your listing. It's beautiful. I'm interested. I'm going to be representing myself. I've got my pre-qualification, whatever it is that you need to see, but I'd love to schedule a time to tour the home with you. And so in that case, once you've set up that showing, that listing agent, they're going to be treating you, the home buyer, like a customer. They have no fiduciary responsibility to you. All of their responsibilities are to the seller. Now, they have to be honest about any defects in the home or anything that's known about the home. So you can ask them questions about that. But when it comes to actually negotiating the deal, you can't ask them like, hey, do you think that the seller would give me $10,000 off? They can't do anything that would be to the financial detriment of their seller. So that is one of their sellers. So that is one of the things that got to recognize. But you're dealing directly with that listing agent. It is different though than dual agency, which is where the listing agent is trying to represent both parties equally. So you got to make that clear that, hey, I recognize listing agent, you're working for the seller. That's cool. Just treat me like a customer. Now, to the second part of your question, you do have sometimes a listing agent that's like, nope, I'm not doing it. It's too much work. It's too much liability. I don't work with unrepresented buyers. And in that case, again, you be polite but firm, where you just remind them that like, hey, what does your seller think about that? Because I'm a qualified buyer, and my understanding is that you work for them to sell the home to a qualified buyer. And apart from you showing me the house, I have no other means of accessing it. So would your seller, is that something that's approved by them? You not showing me, a qualified buyer, the house? Usually once you start to remind them of what their ultimate responsibilities are and what their agreement is to their client, they're going to say, yep, okay, I'll show you the house. And this is kind of where we just are looking for more of that cultural change. Now, fortunately, most of the clients that I've worked with and that have represented themselves, they're finding that listing agents they want to sell the home. They want to do right by sellers. And so they've been pretty accommodating. But your question is valid. There are some crusty agents out there that they don't want things to change, and they do not want to work with unrepresented buyers. And those folks, they just need to be reminded of, hey, who do you actually work for? What are your real goals here? Your personal feelings about unrepresented buyers aside, if you want to do right by your clients, you should show me the home. And if you have to escalate it past that agent, then you've got their managing broker, which is the person that oversees their office, or you've even got the local association of realtors that you can reach out to plead your case.
Okay, and so that's good. And so we have someone watching Nick, because this is a question in my mind. Just say you have a DIYer that has been successful with the deal, the contract. Who actually pays the agent the commission? Is it the seller?
Good question.
Yeah. So the listing agent and the seller are going to have their own agreement as to what the listing agent makes when they sell the house. So speaking to sellers right now, when you sign that agreement with your listing agent, here's what you need to do. You need to determine what the listing agent makes at closing for successfully doing their job of helping you close on an acceptable deal for your house. And then separately, you need to negotiate how much you're willing to pay a buyer's agent, if anything, if one is involved. But those should be two totally different conversations. One of the things that we've got to move away from is where it used to be very common that a seller would say, okay, I'll pay you, listing agent, 6%. And then the listing agent would say, and if there's a buyer's agent, I'll pay the buyer's agent half of that, and I'll give them 3%. We got to move away from that cooperative compensation model, because again, that's part of what cuts buyers at the knees, because the buyer then doesn't have any say in what the buyer's agent gets compensated, right? So, so those should be two separate conversations of what a seller is willing to pay a buyer's agent. Now, a seller may still say, yeah, it's worth it to me to pay 2.5%, 3% to a buyer's agent if there is one, but that'll be a separate conversation. So then on the buyer side, that's what you're asking when you are talking with the listing agent is, okay, has the seller offered any sort of buyer agent compensation? You want to know if there is that offer, because then they're just telling you straight up that the seller has already accounted for, let's just say a 3% credit that they're going to give to compensate a buyer's agent. And you can say, I don't have a buyer's agent. So, you know, because I'm doing the extra work myself, and because the seller, all they care about at the end of the day is their net, how much money they're walking away from, you know, that part of my negotiations are going to be that 3% credit will just go to me. And in 90% of cases, that's not going to be a problem at all. I don't know if that answered the question or if that raises more questions, but.
No, I'm impressed with that answer.
Well, I am too. So that leads me to a question, because you said you can negotiate the 3% for yourself, right? So my question is, what are the potential savings like someone representing themselves could actually get from representing themselves? Because just that 3% alone, that's a good little amount. So what's the potential savings?
Yeah. Well, I mean, at minimum, right, it is whatever that offer of compensation to the buyer's agent is, because you're removing a piece, a service from the transaction. So let's just say if the seller was offering 3% credit for a buyer agent, that 3% has to go somewhere if there is no buyer's agent. And there's only three places it can go. It can go back to the seller, which still benefits you as a buyer, because it means that your offer is now 3% more attractive to that seller than either somebody else that's competing for the home and has an agent, or than, you know, if you had an agent yourself. So that's one way to just make your offer 3% more attractive without having to spend an extra dollar. The other place that it can go is to you, the home buyer, where you just take that 3% right off the purchase price or as a closing cost credit. And then where agents like to see it go is there is ways where the listing agent can say, all right, I'm going to double dip on this, and instead of just getting my 3% commission, I'll get the 6% commission. That's why I'm saying sellers need to be really careful up front when they're negotiating that contract with their listing agent, so that the buyer's agent fee and the listing agent fee are two separate things, so that the listing agent doesn't just absorb that 3% that they didn't have to do any extra work for. All right. So that's why that's so important for folks to keep in mind. But either way, that 3% at minimum benefits you as a home buyer one way or the other. And then you still have the opportunity to negotiate for yourself on top of that. And that's why I educate people on the front end how to do good market research, how to look at comparable properties that have recently sold, so that you can have an idea of, all right, this would be a fair market offer for this particular home. And then once you're in contract, you have further opportunities to negotiate with your inspection contingency, whatever comes out of that inspection. There may be opportunity to negotiate a new roof or a credit for an aged HVAC system. So in a way, you know, the sky is kind of the limit, but there's essentially nothing that a buyer's agent can negotiate for you that you could not negotiate yourself, right?
And so leaning off what you've said, and so our goal is to help people do better with their money. And so because of your experience, I know that you have some insight on this question. So many people, they don't know about this buyer's cost and the seller's cost and all of this. I want you to speak a little bit to people who wanting to sell their homes, but they're not counting the cost prior to selling. So like if you really don't have to move and you're just moving to move up, can you speak to them and let them know how important it is not to waste money on an investment such as a home?
Yeah. Oh man, that's such an awesome question. Because the transaction fees when you sell a home, they generally come out to pretty close to 9 to 10%. And so you might think like, wow, I've got such incredible equity in this house, but like that's one heck of a tax, if you will, like when you go to sell it, like whatever equity that you think you've got, well, it's 10% off the total sales price. So it's more than 10% of your equity that you actually see disappear as soon as you sell it. And so I realize that there are times and seasons of life for when you want to move up, your family's growing, you got to relocate, and that's fine. But when it comes to your primary residence, I really caution people against thinking about their primary residence as a real investment vehicle. Now, if you've got a primary residence and it's appreciating in value, I mean, that's great. That's a bonus, a cherry on top. But it's also like your house is something that you need. It's an essential for life. And so it's not like, oh, the market is really great right now, like now's the time to sell. Like that's just not how things work. So I think real estate investing is a wonderful thing, but I don't think that you should look at your primary residence as a primary investment vehicle. So I caution against that. Buy the house that makes sense for you, that you can be in for a very long time. That's the best way to build wealth in your house long term. And then when it comes time to move up, if you can, I recommend keeping that house that you were just in and using that as a rental property and saving up enough money to buy your next primary residence. So, there's that would be probably a whole nother podcast episode, but there's a lot of different tax advantages and benefits to that. And that's how you save on, you're not actually spending that 9-10% in closing costs and fees by selling your house. You continue to benefit from the appreciation. You also have somebody else that's paying off your mortgage. And the best way to make money in real estate is to hold on to homes forever, right? You don't really make money when you're selling them every couple of years. So I don't know. I know that's not always realistic for everybody, but it's always a question that I ask a seller before they want to list their house of, hey, is it possible for you to hang on to this home and then just buy another home for your primary residence and continue to make some money and build equity in this one that you got?
Whoa, that was a beautiful, beautiful answer, because a lot of people, they don't really think about that, Nick. So I appreciate and thank you very much for sharing that with us. But I think, and then we don't want to hold you too long because we got to bring you back on here again. But things that people should look out for when they're looking for a realtor, I think that's important, because like you already mentioned, some of them, they try to double dip.
Yeah.
And they can see things wrong with the house. They don't even tell you because they're trying to make the commission. So tell us what we need to look for if we're looking for a realtor.
Yeah, that's another really good one. So on the listing side, again, I do think that there's a lot of value in having a listing agent, because at their best, these people are wonderful, wonderful marketers. They've got a lot of connections, and selling your primary residence is generally pretty emotional. You've lived in it, you've had a lot of memories, you put a lot of sweat and work into it. And so it can be hard. Like, you got a lot of sentimental value attached to it that most buyers, when they walk in for the first time, they're not going to have the same appreciation for it. So it can be really helpful to have that agent that's able to level set expectations and just really show your home in the best possible light and market it. So I do advocate for having a listing agent, but a few things to always make sure that you interview at least 2 or 3 agents. Don't just hire one person because they're your auntie or they're your best friend. Don't feel like it's a big thing to be giving somebody, a $20,000-$30,000 commission potentially. So it's okay to be really discerning on who you hire, and then have the conversations with them about, all right, what is your marketing plan? What value, do you think that we should list this home at? And what happens if the house doesn't sell in the first couple of weeks? What does the price drop strategy look like? When do you start recommending that? And these are kind of hard and uncomfortable questions, but you want to have them up front. And then on the compensation, you also really want to make sure that you ask, okay, can we just negotiate your compensation and then negotiate buyer agent compensation separately? Make those 2 totally different conversations. And then ask them, what do you do if there's an unrepresented buyer? What do you do if somebody that's been working with Nick comes up and says that they want to buy this house without a realtor? What's going to be your response to them? And that's going to tell you a lot about the agent's mentality, and if they're really like looking out for you and wanting to do what's in your best interest with selling the house, or if they're really looking out for their profession and their industry and trying to protect. Because if they got hesitations about working with an unrepresented buyer, or if they say, oh, if they're unrepresented, I'm going to charge you an extra 1, 2, 3% commission, that's a big red flag right there. So just being methodical in that interview process, getting some of those questions up front, I think is really important. And it's similar on the buyer side. There's misalignment of incentive structures on the buyer side that you don't have on the listing side, which is again why I think that everybody should at least consider the possibility of doing it themselves before hiring a buyer's agent. But similar, you got to be discerning.
Okay, I like that.
I do. I do. And what I really like is the do-it-yourself part, because so Nick, I know you have an academy. So can you talk to the audience and tell them about your academy? And if somebody want to kind of reach out to you and get into your academy, how would they go about that process?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question very much. So right now, I've been officially doing the academy since about September of last year, 2024. The dream of starting this started in those first clients that I worked with, the friends of mine that I helped go through it. That was about March of last year. So we're coming up on a year of actually executing on this idea. But when it comes to me being a perfect stranger on the internet, offering to help people with the biggest decision of their financial lives for many of them, there's a lot of trust that has to be built. And so because of that, I'm trying to give away as much information as I can for free. So the academy portion right now, I'm not promising forever, but for right now, it is free. It's just on-demand material that walks you through all the steps of the process. That'll probably get you 80-85% of the way there. It's about 6 hours of material. And so your listeners can totally access that. I host that all through a platform called 𝐾𝐨, 𝐶𝐿.com/DIY homebuyer. And so you can join there totally free. You can message me through that platform. You can engage with other DIY homebuyers that are going through the process. So that's really the number one way that I'm just trying to at least help people ask the question of, is this the right fit for me? Now, every transaction is unique, right? So no matter how much I try and perfect the course, it's never going to hit every single possible thing that could happen. And that's where I offer the one-on-one coaching service. So for anybody that's like, all right, this course is great, I feel like I can do this on my own, but I still want to have somebody that's in my corner, not necessarily the agent that's showing up with me to all the showings, but at least somebody that knows this industry that I can talk to when I need to look at a contract, when I need to review an inspection report, when I need to put together a negotiation strategy, just somebody else that's looking out for my best interests. That's where I do offer coaching packages, where those are just flat fee. It's not commission based. My outcomes aren't tied to your outcomes. And that's been a really wonderful way to be able to work directly with people. So I encourage folks to check out the free course first and join that community on the school platform. And then we can go from there if it makes sense to work one-on-one together.
That was wonderful. So now everybody knows how to find you, and you have provided spectacular information, things that we didn't know.
Yeah.
So you definitely educated us. And so to sum it up, if you could give 3 pieces of advice, which you've already done, if you could summarize it in 3 pieces of wisdom that you can impart to the audience about be a DIYer, we would appreciate that.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. So one is just, I truly believe that most people do have the competence to represent themselves. All they need is the confidence, and confidence comes through education. So just know that you have the competence to do it, and we can get you the education so that you can confidently enter those transactions. And then even if you decide that you do want to work with a buyer's agent at the end of the day, still an educated consumer is the best consumer. And so since that course is free, learning as much as you can about the home buying process is just a really good way to look out for yourself, and to also just know what's going through your agent's mind, and to just make sure that every step of the way, if you do work with an agent, that they're really looking out for you. you. And the final piece of advice, this is kind of corny. It's just right off the top, but I think you got to be good to people. And that,
Yes.
you know, it just, it plays out in every facet of life, but especially in real estate, it is such a relational kind of business. You're as a home buyer, you're buying somebody else's home that most likely is a place that they've loved, they've lived a lot of life in. And so you want to be good to sellers. The listing agents, as much as I have talked about buyer's agents not providing value, there's a lot of really amazing people that are real estate agents that work very hard. They do very good work. And so be good to them. And it's just amazing the way that I see it, where when you show up with the attitude of that, like, yeah, of course I want to protect my interests, I want the best deal, but every step of the way, like my focus is to do good to the people around me. It's like you were saying earlier, all of that somehow just comes right back around to us and is a mutual blessing in the end. And you look back on those transactions with like, man, this was a good experience. So that's not exactly a clean and succinct way of putting those, but those would be my three pieces of wisdom for your wonderful listeners.
Thank you, Nick. Okay.
Well, Nick, listen, we want to thank you for your time on Bartelle Money Talk. The information you provided has been real valuable to not only to us, but to the audience as well. So we really appreciate that. And audience, if you really like what you heard, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue to provide you more content that will help you go about saving your money and growing your money. So again, thank you, Nick. And until next time, Nick, you have a good one.
Thanks
That's
again,
right.
Nick.
Y'all are the best. Thank you.
You're welcome.